Well, hello everybody. It's been a little while, and quite frankly, I won't be able to do this all that frequently, so I'm taking my time. One of the fellows asked me the other day whether I couldn't keep it down to about 5 or 6 minutes rather than make it so long. Problem is, I don't get a chance to do this too often, and when I do, I might as well get as much in as I can. Besides, there's a lot of territory to cover. And I'm running this particular one simultaneously on YouTube and on live video. And I will watch the results and watch the response and decide on which way to go. Now, it's a tough subject, and people have some compassion for me and some feeling and understanding, I guess, how to broach this in the best possible way and be honest about it. So I will tell, first of all, that I'm not speaking for others. This is strictly my own opinion. I'm not an expert. I'm not a historian. I should not be daring to claim to any of those kind of qualities. So, and I can tell you quite frankly that I have no sympathy for Mr. Hitler. He's caused an awful lot of trouble, and he's been a very bad boy. And I can't tell you that I have any kind of feelings in that direction, but that doesn't mean that I don't have feelings for my colleagues in the military and for my colleagues in general, for the Germans. And there has been a great deal of distortion in historic presentations. One of them is about the beginning of World War I, when I will have a chance next time maybe to go into that. It's a bit of a historic situation, and I will always quote either American or British or international sources that are qualified to talk. I will not quote German sources because they may be suspect. So when I give you sources, you can believe me, they are checked out, and as far as the beginning of World War I is concerned, everybody blames the Germans for that, and that isn't necessarily so. Then there's the question about the Lusitania. That's another thing that brought into World War I, brought the Americans in. And there's different schools of thought on that particular situation, so I will get into that too. And the end of World War I, the peace treaty of Versailles was so unfair to the Germans that it brought Hitler into the picture, and it made Hitler look attractive. Not an easy task, believe me, but with the conditions the way they were at the time, the Allies bear some responsibility for that as well. Well, now that's just a little introduction here, and please don't get me mixed up with the neo-Nazis. I have nothing to do with those kind of hoodlums. So now, as for my own opinions about war, believe me, there isn't a bigger dove around than myself. I may have been a hawk at one time, but that's been a long, long time ago. Today I have very strong anti-war feelings. I think that situations should always be tried to be resolved by negotiation, by diplomacy, and not by war. That is absolutely unforgivable. Now, as to my own situation, I told you at one time that I was a Luftwaffenhelfer, and that means an Air Force helper, a very derogatory term in my estimation, because we did do a men's job, and we were exposed to a hostile environment, and we did still have to do our schoolwork, so it was a very, very unfair situation. But during that time, we were in school, and of course we were visited occasionally by recruiters from the military. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? And they were giving us a beautiful picture of what war was really like. I mean, it was just nothing but glamour, and they never showed anything that was really nasty as far as their own people were concerned. Everybody seems to be just having a blast, and the uniforms were so pretty, I mean, really, and all the medals, and my God, we couldn't wait to join up. But when you're young, you're stupid, and this was one way how they could get us. And I think there's a little bit of deja vu nowadays, because the same problem arises now. Recruiters going to the schools trying to talk the boys into joining up. Well, then billeting. We had billeting at our place. We had a big farm, and One of the barns was provided for the soldiers, and of course they came with their equipment, and for us young kids this was just too much. I mean, it was very interesting, and we had one of the sergeants build it in our house, and so we had an interesting time then. Now, the prestige of the military in those days in Germany was very different from what it is here. Here, it's just a job, and it's being considered as a job, and that's all it is. In Germany, it was like a profession. It was very glamorous, and it was absolutely expected. All the wealthy people were expected to serve their stint in the military, become an officer, and then retire into their various jobs. But the military was a very glamorous situation, and that was taken over from the Prussians way back in the 1700s. Now, when I was in the labor service, and that was the stint I went into after the Air Force helper, and in between I was home for a little while, and I was home on July 20th, 1944, in between these two services. And on July 20th in 1944, you may not know this, but there was an attempt made on Hitler's life. Not that there hadn't been attempts made before, but this was a big one. And the feeling was that if you remove Hitler, you will also have to remove all the people around him, because this went very, very deep. And by just removing him, you may end up in a worse position, because the next one in line would probably be Himmler, and he was the head of the SS. And if you can imagine it to be any worse, that might very well have been the case. So 300 and some odd officers, 360 I believe, decided they would do away with Hitler, and it was really planned very, very carefully. And the only way they could get to him and some of the others was to do it in the bunker in the field somewhere in East Prussia. It was very fortified, and only very few people would be admitted. And among them was a young officer by the name of Kurt Count von Stauffenberg. Now, Graf von Stauffenberg, or Count von Stauffenberg, which is the same thing. He had only one arm, and he had an attaché case, and he was trusted, a very much trusted man by Hitler. And he carried in that attaché case a huge bomb, and he was able to smuggle that in. He put it under the table right in front of Hitler. He was sitting next to him. And then he excused himself. He went out, and a plane waited for him and flew him into Berlin, where the troops waited to storm the headquarters of the SS, and the entire thing was very, very well organized. However, Hitler somehow saw the briefcase, used his foot and pushed it beyond the leg of the table. And when the bomb exploded, Hitler lost his pants, but other than that, he was unscathed. And of course, he figured this was a signal by God that he actually could not be killed, and it made things terrible. These 360 officers were rounded up, and they were all executed. One of them was an uncle of mine, who was also a colonel in the army, and he was waiting in Berlin. He was rounded up, and he was immediately sentenced and shot. Actually, he was shot almost the same, I think on the same day. He was fortunate, because the ones that were executed later on did not have it that easy. Now, one of the people who was organizing this, this assassination attempt was our famous Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Now, I will show you a picture of Stauffenberg, and I will show you a picture of Rommel, and you will see who he is. And if you don't know about him, he is probably the most famous general of the entire war, including all of the generals of the Allied forces. And the Allies were totally enthralled by him. He would have been the one running Germany if the assassination attempt had succeeded. He was wounded and was recuperating at home. And when Hitler heard that Rommel was involved, he became furious and absolutely decided that he had to go. He had to be executed. But Rommel was so well liked by the German people and by all the soldiers that he couldn't afford to have him executed. So what he did do is he sent two staff officers who were friends of Rommel, believe it or not, to his house in order to pick him up. And you must imagine this situation. Now, here's Rommel. He's being walked outside his estate by these two friends, and they tell him, look, we have terrible news. As you know, the plot did not succeed. You were mentioned as being the ringleader, or we being one of the ringleaders of the plot, and Hitler decided to execute you. Well, Rommel must have said, well, I would like to see a court or something like that, but they told him, look, we have orders to give you this poison for you to take on the way back to Berlin, and when you get to Berlin, you are supposed to be dead, and you have died from the effect of your wounds. And he said, why would I do that? Well, they said, well, if you want to save your family, that's what you'll have to do. So Rommel had the duty to tell his wife and his son what was going on, say goodbye to them for the last time, and he arrived in Berlin dead. Now, in order to make this thing even worse, he was given a state funeral by Hitler with all the honors you could possibly give him, and there were his wife and his son sitting in the audience and looking at this circus. I mean, can you imagine what the people must have felt? Well, if this had succeeded, D-Day would never have to occur. All the terrible bombings in Dresden and so on would never have happened, and tens of thousands of Allied and German lives would have been saved. So it's a real shame that that happened. Well, anyway, after this, my father, since we also belong to a Prussian family, told me that it's a very dangerous time for us because we're on the blacklist, so we better watch our step. Be very, very careful what you say and who you say it to. Now, my time at home was over, and I had to go to the labor service. The labor service was in a small town in northern Germany. I frankly liked it. I had a feeling that it was a useful thing. I came from a very wealthy family, but I was now being mixed up with people from all sorts of conditions. Some of them were very poor, some of them were middle class, and so on. And I enjoyed it. I had an insight, got an insight, and I really felt it was a useful situation. Until one day there was an air raid in the nearest town. It was a very nasty air raid, much worse than the one I had gone through once before. But about a week after that air raid, we were told that we had to go to that city in order to clean up. Well, okay, so that's part of the job. Now, don't forget, we were 16 years old. We were loaded into trucks, and we were driven to that town. When we then had to line up and we were given assignments, I was among a group of boys who were given the assignment, a riding stable. Well, I figured that's a pretty good deal. Riding stable, maybe a couple of horses, and well, we got there. We were about, I would say we were half a mile away from the riding stable. The smell was absolutely incredible. It was a terrible stink. And then we got to the riding stable, and it turned out to be a morgue. So when we got in there, there were SS soldiers, and there were big milk cans outside with alcohol, and they were all soused. I mean, with this job that they had to do, it was horrible. So we got in there, and they said, no, you guys can't have anything to drink. You're only 16 years old. There was a woman, and I will never forget this, with a rubber apron, and she was a real tough cookie, and she ordered us around and said, you, and you, go in there, and you stack these bodies into those coffins. And they had these very primitive coffins made. And we said, how? Well, just throw them in, 2 or 3 at a time, as many as you can fit in one. And then she said, and there are some hands and legs over there, and you can always throw them in and fill up those coffins. You have no idea how horrible this was. These were all women and children that had been killed, and old men. It was all civilians, and there were just bits and pieces of them, and the stink was absolutely overpowering. And we could not have alcohol, we couldn't have anything, and we had to do this for 2 days in a row. We didn't eat for a week. I mean, we threw up, we vomited all over the place. It was horrible. And I have not been able to talk about this for any length of time. I can tell you, if you were for the war, that would really cure you. And you believed in God, that would cure you too. It did me. and since then I gave up on that. So I think for now I'll let this be enough, and what I will do is I will show you pictures, one of myself as an Air Force helper, a very fierce fighting man, you know, only 16 years old, one of Field Marshal Rommel, one of Count von Stauffenberg, one of a V-1 rocket. This is the buzz bomb that went, and you know, I told you about that. It goes over when the motor kicks out, it goes down. And then one of the V-2 that was being built in Peenemünde, where we were at the research facility. Well, for now, I will leave you, and I'll show you those pictures and see if I can work this out somehow.